The Roxford Theatre had stood tall for nearly a century, a silent witness to the city's whirlwind changes. Its red brick facade had been worn down by time, yet still stood proudly among the sleek glass towers rising like memoryless giants. What was once a vibrant cultural hub now carried an air of melancholy, as though waiting for something, or someone, to pull it back from the edge of oblivion. Jackson Reeve pulled up the collar of his heavy coat as the chill of autumn crept into every seam. His breath mingled with the fog like drifting fragments of a wandering soul. At 43, his neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair and an unremarkable face helped him blend in easily. He was the kind of man you wouldn't notice walking by, and that was no accident, but intention. As the behind-the-scenes owner of a nationwide chain of historic theaters, he understood the value of invisibility. With a fortune worth billions, Jackson chose not to bask in limelight, but instead operated quietly behind the curtain, where true power moved in silence. But tonight he wasn't here as a billionaire owner. Tonight he was Jack, the new lighting technician with credentials just convincing enough to get hired, yet modest enough to avoid attention. A perfect cover for a mission he believed no one but him could carry out. The phone in his coat pocket buzzed, its screen lighting up his increasingly cold fingers. A message from Deanna, the only assistant who knew about his real plan, appeared. "Are you sure? If anything's wrong, the board can step in immediately." Jackson typed a quick reply. "Numbers don't tell the whole story. Something's off here, and I need to see it with my own eyes." He slipped the phone back in his pocket, eyes fixed on the chipped metal stage door tucked behind the theater. A door holding untold stories. Moments later, the door creaked open. A woman in her 50s stood there, her faded auburn hair tied in a messy bun, eyes tired, yet still flickering with resilient strength. "You must be Jack," she said, her voice rough from years of calling cues backstage. "I'm Martha, the house manager. You're earlier than I expected." Jackson shook her hand, feeling the callousest testament to a life of relentless work. "I like to arrive early, get a feel for the place." Martha nodded with a faint, weary smile. "We need all the enthusiasm we can get. We're running on fumes these days. Budget's been gutted. The big theaters downtown are pulling in all the crowds." Jackson nodded, though he knew the truth was far more complicated. Financial reports showed that the Roxford had steady ticket sales and received generous cultural grants, yet somehow the payroll was tight and maintenance was consistently underfunded. Money was leaking somewhere, and he suspected someone was making sure it disappeared. They walked through a maze of narrow, damp-smelling hallways, where old wood creaked under their feet like the whispers of the building's past. Jackson could feel the theater's history in every breath of dust, but also something else. A presence, perhaps, something hidden, a secret waiting to be uncovered. Then, suddenly, they turned a corner, and the main stage revealed itself like a vision. Jackson stopped in his tracks. He had seen hundreds of stages in his life, but something about this one tightened his chest. Even empty theaters held magic, a promise that anything was possible, if only someone believed enough. A warm amber work light bathed the stage, where a few crew members were arranging props for the next day's performance. Martha lowered her voice as though not to disturb the soul of the place. "That's Gregory Lane, our artistic director." She gestured toward a tall man wrapped in an over-the-top scarf, gesticulating dramatically as though the world was his audience. Temperamental but undeniably talented. Sometimes he's the only thing keeping this place from falling apart. Her tone carried a reluctant respect, believable yet not fully convinced. Jackson watched Gregory closely, his movements, his posture, especially the way he loomed over a young teen with sharp, raised tones. Jackson asked quietly. "Yeah, His mom works the box office. He's been hanging around here since he was 12. Now he's on the payroll as a stagehand. Gregory's taken a special interest, kind of a mentor thing." Her voice wavered ever so slightly. She quickly added, "Lucky kid, really. Gregory's got industry connections all over the place." Just then, Gregory's voice rang out, cutting through the air. "For God's sake, Milo, if you can't even hit basic spike marks, maybe you're not cut out for this job." The words dropped like a blade, and Jackson saw it in Milo's posture, the flinch, the stooped shoulders, the instinct to shrink. Not fear, exactly, more like endurance stretched too thin. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 17, hung his head low, shoulders tight as if bracing for impact. "Sorry, Mr. Lane. I'll fix it right away." His voice trembled, cracked, too used to reprimands, too used to being made small. Jackson narrowed his eyes. That body language didn't come from a single scolding. It came from repetition, conditioning. "Gregory's passionate," Martha said quickly, offering a half-smile as if to excuse the director's behavior. "Let me show you the lighting booth." They ascended the side stairs, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. Jackson stole one last glance back and caught a telling moment. Gregory gripping Milo's shoulder, leaning in close, whispering something that drained the color from the boy's face. Milo didn't flinch. He froze, eyes vacant. The lighting booth was a cramped space, cluttered with old and new equipment, an odd marriage of vintage control boards and digital upgrades. It looked like every era of the theater's past had left a fingerprint here. It was messy, uneven, just like everything else at Roxford. "Your predecessor left in a hurry," Martha said, brushing her hand across the control board. "Said it was a family emergency, never came back. Didn't even collect his final paycheck." "That's unusual," Jackson said, voice calm, though his mind was racing. Martha looked away. "Things happen. You'll be running tomorrow's show. The cues are pre-programmed, but Gregory likes things responsive to the actor's energy, so be ready to improvise." After a quick overview, Martha left him alone. Jackson sank into the chair, pulled up the lighting software. He wasn't a lighting tech by trade, but he knew his way around it. Years of backing productions had made sure of that. He'd even trained intensively with a Broadway tech just for this assignment. But the real reason he was here had nothing to do with lighting. 6 months ago, a letter had arrived at his office. No return address, postmarked from this city. "Roxford is bleeding, and not just money. Look under the stage." He had started by investigating from afar, financials, background checks, but everything was vague. No smoking gun, just irregularities and an abnormally high staff turnover rate. Something was happening here, something that numbers couldn't explain. And so now, in the dead of night, Jackson sat inside his own theater, disguised as a third-tier hire, launching an investigation no one knew had begun. 3 hours later, the theater was silent. The last of the cast and crew had gone. Only security remained. Jackson had told Martha he wanted time alone to learn the board. She gave him a key card with near full access. He moved silently through the empty corridors, making mental notes of blind spots and camera placements. As he crossed the stage, his eyes locked on the ghost light, a single bulb on a tall stand, burning in the dark. A long-held theater tradition. Superstition said it kept spirits at bay, or in other tales, it lit the way for ghosts to perform once the audience had gone. This one flickered erratically, its glow stuttering like an unsteady breath. Jackson stepped closer, inspecting it. The bulb was tight, the wiring untouched, and yet it pulsed, alive, almost. Then a sound from the wings, a shadow, movement too quick to catch. "Hello?" Jackson called out. "Someone there?" No reply, but the ghost light steadied, its glow constant once more. Jackson stood in the dark, breath slow, heart alert. There was something here, and it was just beginning. But this time, the ghost light wasn't behaving normally. It flickered and pulsed like a panicked heartbeat, casting erratic, dancing shadows across the wooden stage floor. Jackson stepped closer, checking the bulb and wiring. Everything seemed intact, yet the light kept flickering, as if responding to something unseen. At that moment, a faint sound came from the wings. A dark figure flashed across his peripheral vision, quick, blurry, like an illusion. "Is someone there?" Jackson called out, his voice steady and trained. Not from fear, but sharpened alertness. No answer. But the ghost light had stopped blinking. Now it glowed steadily, silent, as if something had just been calmed or retreated into the darkness. Jackson stood there, alone, wrapped in the thick silence of the theater, like the heavy velvet of a stage curtain, and felt it deep in his bones. The truth here wasn't just about numbers or managerial neglect. Something deeper, older, and far more dangerous was lurking beneath these rotting floorboards. Jackson narrowed his eyes. In all his years navigating the silent wars of corporations and theaters alike, he'd learned one hard truth. A building always reflected the soul of the organization inside. Every crack in the wall, every flickering light, every warped door, they whispered something. Sometimes they cried out for help. The flickering ghost light wasn't superstition anymore. It felt like a suppressed emergency signal, waiting, desperate, for someone to care enough to listen. He moved backstage, where the dim lighting revealed water-stained ceilings and peeling paint. A theater with a budget like the Roxfords shouldn't look like this. These were signs of long-term neglect, or worse, an intentional effort to hide something. A bulletin board caught his attention. Rehearsal schedules, staff notices, safety protocols. But in the middle of the yellowed papers was one sheet that stood out, crisp and new. Restricted area, old prop storage, authorized personnel only, hazardous materials. The ink was still fresh. Jackson swiped his access card at the reader beside the heavy metal door marked prop. The indicator light stayed red. Interesting. Why would an old prop room need this level of security? As he turned to leave, a silent figure appeared behind him, nearly causing him to cry out. "Jesus," Jackson muttered, instinctively reaching for his pocket. "You scared the hell out of me." The young stagehand stood there, face pale, eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered urgently, his voice tight like someone expecting to get caught. His eyes darted past Jackson's shoulder, as though someone might emerge from the shadows at any second. "Marta gave me clearance," Jackson replied calmly, studying the boy more closely now. Milo was far too thin, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. On his right wrist, a faint red mark peeked out from under his sleeve, a silent accusation. "And Jack, the new lighting tech." "I know who you are," Milo said, barely above a breath. "They're always watching, even when you think they're not." Before Jackson could ask more, the backstage door slammed open. Gregory Lane's voice boomed with fury. "Milo, where the hell did you go?" The change in Milo was instant and chilling. His face went blank, eyes lowered, shoulders collapsed inward like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "I have to go," he mumbled, brushing past Jackson like a living shadow. Jackson stood frozen, watching the boy vanish down the dark corridor, a cold knot twisted in his gut. No, this wasn't just about mismanaged budgets or failed leadership. This was something darker, deeper, something that made even a man like Jackson, who'd seen the ugliest corners of corporate greed, feel a chill. 3 days into his undercover assignment, Jackson was inspecting the overhead rigging system above the stage. The theater had been empty for hours, rehearsal wrapped up at 10. He preferred working at this hour, when Gregory's oppressive presence no longer loomed and the tension in the air seemed to ease slightly. He moved along the catwalk high above the stage, checking each connection and noting any wear in his tablet. Diana, his loyal assistant, had texted him twice that day, worried the assignment was dragging on too long. The board was growing impatient. Jackson simply replied, "I'm close, just need a few more days." Thud. A faint noise below, then again thud, louder this time. Jackson froze, every sense on edge. The sound wasn't loud, but something about it felt wrong. He checked his watch. 1:17 AM. On. The night security guard was supposed to be making rounds, but Jackson had noticed he usually dozed off at the front desk by the lobby. Jackson quietly descended the catwalk and moved backstage, following the sound. There it was again. Soft, muffled, undeniable. Thud, thud. The noise was coming from the direction of the old prop storage room, the same restricted area he'd tried to access earlier. The kind of room that shouldn't require electronic locks in a place like this. Jackson stopped in front of the heavy steel door. The red light still glowed on the reader. He pressed his ear to the cold metal. Thud. Then a muffled cry. Like a voice. Gagged. His heartbeat surged, throat dry. This wasn't superstition, it wasn't some old theater ghost story. It was real, alive, and dangerous. Something, or someone, was inside. He studied the electronic lock, a standard maglock system but clearly older than the others in the building. Forcing it would leave obvious signs. Too risky. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened an app Diana had all but begged him to install. "Just in case," she'd said. The digital key generator went to work, cycling through access codes. For 30 seconds, Jackson stood frozen, heartbeat loud in his ears. Until, click, the light turned green. He gripped the handle, a beat of hesitation, a primal instinct warning him. Then he opened the door. The stench hit him like a slap, damp air thick with sweat and mildew. Unlike the rest of the backstage, which was at least minimally maintained, this room had been abandoned completely. Dust coated the leaning set walls, broken chairs and tables were piled into a chaotic maze. A dead space, but not without movement. The thud stopped as the door opened. "Hello?" Jackson called quietly, switching on the flashlight on his phone. The beam cut through the dust, revealing fake Victorian-style parlor flats. A low sound came from behind them. Jackson crept forward, light steady, heart racing. Then he froze. Milo. The boy was tied to a wooden chair, ankles and wrists bound with coarse rope. A filthy rag gagged his mouth. His eyes, wide with panic, squinted into the light. But what stopped Jackson cold was the look that followed. Recognition. Not relief, but deeper fear. Jackson quickly lowered the light and rushed to his side. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, kneeling. "Who did this to you?" Milo shook his head repeatedly, choking out muffled cries from behind the gag. Jackson removed it first. The boy gasped for air like someone who'd just been pulled from drowning. "You have to leave. Now," he whispered, eyes darting nervously as if the shadows themselves were listening. "They'll come back." "I'm not leaving you like this," Jackson said firmly, already working at the knots. The ropes were tied so tightly they had cut off circulation. The skin around Milo's wrists was torn, raw and swollen. This wasn't the first time. "Please," Milo begged. "If they find out, someone knows. It'll get worse." Jackson paused. His instinct screamed to call the police right away. But Milo's eyes, the eyes of someone who'd lived with quiet punishment, stopped him. There was something deeper at play. A power structure Milo was caught in, a pawn too small to break free. "How long has this been going on?" Jackson asked quietly, resuming his work. Milo swallowed, his throat as dry as sand. 3 weeks. Since I found that book. A what book? "You need to leave," Milo repeated, desperation rising in his voice. "I can handle it. My mom, she needs this job." The rope around his wrists fell away, revealing angry red welts that looked like fire burns. Jackson moved to his ankles. "Who did this, Milo?" His voice was soft, but sharp as a blade. Silence. The kind of silence that said everything. "Gregory." A sudden noise broke their moment. Footsteps, growing closer. Milo froze. His eyes twitched violently, mouth opening in a breathless panic. "Hide," he hissed. "Behind the flats." "No," Jackson whispered, already pulling out his phone. In the seconds they had, he snapped photo after photo of Milo bound to the chair, his injuries, the filthy, dust-covered room. Each click of the shutter felt like a dagger slashing through the veil of secrecy. If anyone came back now, they'd be met with evidence. Jackson wasn't just an invisible owner anymore. He had stepped into a role, in this time. That role was to save a child drowning in darkness. He handed the loosened rope to Milo. "Make it look like you got part of it off," Jackson whispered quickly, calm but urgent. "I'll create a distraction." Before Milo could respond, Jackson slid behind a large wooden wardrobe in the corner. He pressed himself against the cold wall, eye to a small crack between the furniture and the plaster. Just enough to see the door. The footsteps stopped just outside. A soft beep from the keycard reader. Then the heavy door creaked open. Light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating Gregory Lane's face. His sharp, aristocratic features looked theatrical under the glow, like a villain revealed mid-say. Jackson was surprised. He had expected Gregory to send someone else. Men like him usually had others do their dirty work. But Gregory had come alone. And the confidence in his stride was chilling. "Still struggling with those ropes," Gregory said smoothly, as if making casual conversation. "Persistent little rat, aren't you?" Milo had managed to position himself so one hand looked nearly free, while the other remained tied, but his expression had changed. No longer pure fear. There was resistance now, smoldering under the surface. Jackson watched Milo's eyes and saw something still alive, unbroken. "Someone's going to find out eventually," Milo said, his voice stronger than before. Gregory laughed, a cold, echoing sound like a clown's cackle in an abandoned circus. "Who's going to believe you over me? Your mom, who sells tickets for minimum wage? Or the board, who've signed off on every proposal I've ever put forward?" He stepped closer, leaned in, and hissed like venom. "No one cares about nobody's backstage. You should have stayed out of things that weren't your concern." Jackson's grip on his phone tightened. Every word Gregory spoke was a knife. Every syllable made him want to break cover and expose him on the spot. But he didn't move. Not yet. This wasn't about anger. It was about proof. About ending this in a way that couldn't be undone. Just then, a loud crash echoed somewhere in the theater, followed by a startled shout. Gregory snapped his head toward the door. "What the hell was that?" Another crash. Louder. Something heavy had fallen. "Stay put," Gregory growled at Milo before storming out, slamming the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Jackson emerged from hiding. "Run," he whispered. "The night guard probably knocked something over." "We don't have much time," Milo said, shakily trying to stand. His legs trembled beneath him. "I'm getting you out of here," Jackson said, pulling out his phone, preparing to call the police. "No, please, not yet." Milo grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "If you report this now, they'll deny everything. It'll be my word against his." And then he looked back at the chair, the place that had held him captive, his eyes haunted, as if part of him was still trapped there. Jackson wanted to argue, to pull him out right then, but the raw desperation in Milo's eyes silenced him. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. "Pretend you didn't see anything. For now. I need time. I need to understand more. If I make the wrong move, my mom loses her job. And I lose mine too." Jackson bit his lip. Every instinct he had screamed no. But the respect he'd grown for this boy, this brave, wounded soul, won. "All right. But this isn't over. No one should have to live like this, Milo." Milo's eyes brimmed with tears. He blinked them back, trying not to let them fall. "Why do you even care? You've only been here 3 days. Jackson placed a hand gently on his shoulder. His voice was low, steady. "Because someone has to, and this time it's me." The next 3 days were a test of restraint. Every time Jackson saw Gregory striding across the theater like a self-anointed king, barking orders, charming donors with his polished smile, shooting controlling glances at Milo, he had to fight the urge to blow the whole thing up. Instead, he worked silently. Each morning, he brought coffee for the crew, a small gesture of care. Milo's always had extra sugar. Jackson remembered that. He volunteered for the heavier lifting, took on more backstage grunt work, and whenever Gregory was around, Jackson made sure to be nearby, an invisible shield between predator and prey. Gregory didn't suspect a thing. To him, Jackson was just another lighting tech, low on the totem pole, invisible. And that underestimation would be his greatest mistake. What Gregory didn't know was this. The man he was underestimating was the one quietly lighting the fuse to his downfall. On Thursday afternoon, Jackson found Milo alone in the lighting booth, tangled in a mess of cables that mirrored the chaos in his own mind. "Aren't you supposed to be helping with the set change?" Jackson asked gently, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch made Milo tense instantly. His whole body stiffened for a split second, a reflex Jackson was beginning to recognize as a familiar sign of fear. But when Milo saw it was Jackson, he eased slightly. "Gregory told me to sort through these cables before tomorrow's show," the boy said with a shrug, the gesture one of tired resignation. "Said I messed up the system's organization. Welcome to the Roxford." Jackson bent down and picked up a cable. These were neatly coiled last night. Milo gave a dry half-smile and said nothing. That shrug carried a whole world of silent endurance, something Jackson was starting to deeply resent. He sat down on the stool beside the boy and quietly began helping untangle the wires. "How's your wrist?" he asked. Milo instantly pulled down his sleeve. "Better," he muttered without looking up. They worked in silence, the soft swish of cables sliding through their fingers mingling with the faint echoes of rehearsal from the stage below. To Jackson, the silence was sacred. He knew that sometimes presence spoke louder than any question. Then, out of nowhere, Milo asked, "Why are you really here?" Jackson took a beat before replying, "You don't think I'm a lighting tech?" Milo let out a quiet laugh for the first time since Jackson had met him. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who's spent his life climbing lighting rigs. Your hands are too clean, no calluses, and you ask weird questions." He looked up and for the first time met Jackson's eyes without fear. "Are you a cop?" "No," Jackson answered honestly, "but I am investigating something." Silence again, but it wasn't tense this time. Milo looked down at his hands, then back at Jackson. "It's about the money, isn't it?" Jackson gave a small nod. "It's about the book," Milo whispered, eyes flicking toward the door, like he feared something could burst through it at any moment. "Not here," he added quickly. "After rehearsal. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks down on Pine Street. 9 o'clock. I'll meet you there." Jackson understood instantly what the offer meant. It was a signal, a gesture of trust from a boy who'd learned to live in fear, now choosing to take a chance. "I'll be there," he said quietly, like a promise meant only for the two of them. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Jackson arrived. He chose a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. An old habit from another life, even though he wasn't technically in danger tonight. Milo arrived 7 minutes late. His eyes swept the shop as he entered, shoulders hunched, steps cautious but quick. He wore a hoodie despite the warm weather, his hands hidden deep in the sleeves. "Sorry," he murmured as he sat. "Had to make sure I wasn't followed." Jackson slid a cup across the table. "Hot chocolate. Figured you didn't need the caffeine." A faint smile, soft as mist, touched Milo's lips. "Thanks." He took a sip, his hands still trembling slightly, but when he spoke, his voice was steadier than Jackson had ever heard it. 3 weeks ago, I was assigned to clean out the old rehearsal room for the new season. While clearing the shelves, I knocked over a prompt book, an old one, from a 1990s production of A Streetcar Named Desire. Milo paused, took another sip. "Everything's digital now, but Gregory keeps old ones around, calls it the theatrical heritage." I didn't think much of it until the book hit the floor and fell open. "What was inside?" Jackson asked, his voice like air. "Documents. Receipts, budget reports, grant applications, donation letters. At first, I thought it was just admin paperwork, until I saw the numbers." Milo looked up. This time, there was no fear in his eyes, only a long-suppressed rage. "The Youth Scholarship Fund, the one they brag about every year. Fundraisers, promo videos, city grants. My mom and I have been part of this theater forever. She sells tickets, I help backstage. When I turned 16, I applied to that scholarship. I thought I had a shot." Jackson nodded. He remembered the program, proudly displayed on Roxford's brochures, touted as the beating heart of its community outreach. "I was rejected," Milo said, eyes falling to his cooling hot chocolate. "No explanation? No letter? Nothing. Just silence?" And in that long pause, Jackson saw it clearly. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about betrayal, about broken trust, about a kid trying to rise from the ashes of a dream burned down. Gregory said the funds were limited, that there were more qualified applicants. But those papers in that old book, those things no one was supposed to care about anymore, they showed over $200,000, 0 cents, had been allocated to the Youth Scholarship Fund last year. "And you know what?" Milo looked up, his voice trembling with fury. "Only 3 scholarships were given out, partial ones, around $5,000, 0 cents each." Jackson felt a slow, cold anger rise in his chest. "Where did the rest go?" he asked, though the picture was already forming in his mind. He'd seen this kind of corruption before. "There were transfer records," Milo said, his voice raw. "Most of the money went to a company called Laneway Productions. That's Gregory's private production company. He stages shows in New York." Jackson clenched his jaw. He had suspected financial misconduct, but stealing from a scholarship program built for kids like Milo, that wasn't just theft. It was calculated cruelty. "When I confronted him," Milo continued, his voice cracking, "he laughed in my face, said I didn't understand how the theater world worked, that it wasn't my place." Milo's expression went hollow. "Night, after rehearsal, he and 2 guys from the crew, Bruno and Trent, they cornered me, dragged me into the old prop storage." His voice broke, then trailed into silence. "He said I needed to learn a lesson, that I needed to respect my betters." Jackson said nothing. He knew if he spoke now, the fury inside him would boil over. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked, keeping his tone as calm as possible. "What proof?" Milo replied, shoulders sagging like someone used to disappointment. Gregory took back all the documents. I got out with nothing. And besides, Milo hesitated, then spoke in a voice so small it was almost lost. My mom needs this job. She's a single parent. In a town like this, there aren't a lot of options. If I make trouble, they'll fire her before anyone even notices I'm gone. But what Gregory didn't realize was this. The very man he underestimated was the one quietly lighting the fuse to his collapse. On Thursday afternoon, Jackson found Milo sitting alone in the lighting booth, struggling with a mess of tangled cables, each knot a mirror of the chaos in the boy's mind. "Aren't you supposed to be helping with the set change?" Jackson asked softly, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock made Milo flinch, his body stiffening for a moment, a reflex Jackson was starting to recognize as a telltale sign of someone who lived in fear of being caught. But when Milo saw that it was Jackson, his tension eased. "Gregory told me to clean up this mess before tomorrow's show, said I ruined the system's organization." Milo shrugged, as if used to being blamed. "Welcome to the Roxford." Jackson bent down and picked up one of the cords. These were still neatly organized last night. Milo offered a dry half-smile but didn't respond. That tired shrug held a lifetime's worth of resignation, something Jackson had grown to despise with every fiber of his being. He sat on the stool next to Milo and quietly started helping untangle the cables. "How's your wrist?" Milo immediately tugged down his sleeve. "Better," he said without meeting Jackson's eyes. They worked in silence, the soft rustle of cables gliding between their fingers and the muffled sounds of rehearsal downstairs were the only noises filling the room. Jackson valued that silence. He knew that sometimes presence could do more than questions ever could. Then, unexpectedly, Milo broke it. "Why are you really here?" Jackson took a beat before answering. "You don't think I'm a lighting tech?" Milo chuckled quietly, for the first time since Jackson met him. "You don't look like someone who's spent their life crawling around lighting rigs. Your hands are too smooth, and you ask a lot of weird questions." He looked up, and for the first time met Jackson's gaze directly, unguarded. "Are you a cop?" "No," Jackson answered honestly, "but I am investigating something." Silence returned, but it was no longer tense. Milo looked down at his hands, then back at Jackson. "It's about the money, isn't it?" Jackson nodded slightly. "It's about the notebook," Milo whispered, eyes darting to the door as if fearing something might break through. "Not here," he added quickly. "After rehearsal, there's a coffee shop 3 blocks down on Pine Street, 9 o'clock. I'll meet you there." Jackson understood the gravity of the offer instantly. It was a signal, a gesture of trust from a boy who had lived with fear, now choosing to place his faith in someone. "I'll be there," he said softly, like a quiet promise. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Jackson arrived. He picked a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. An old habit from another life, even though he technically wasn't in danger. Milo showed up 7 minutes late. His eyes scanned the room as he entered, shoulders hunched, movements cautious but quick. He wore a hoodie despite the warm weather, his hands buried deep in the sleeves. "Sorry," he murmured, taking the seat across from Jackson. "I had to make sure no one followed me." Jackson pushed a cup across the table. "Hot chocolate? Figured you didn't need any more caffeine." A fleeting smile crossed Milo's lips, barely there, like mist. "Thanks." He took a sip, his hand still slightly trembling, but when he spoke, his voice was steadier than ever before. 3 weeks ago, I was assigned to clean the old rehearsal room for the new season. While clearing a shelf, I knocked over an old prompt book for A Streetcar Named Desire from the '90s. Milo paused, took another sip. Everything's digital now, but Gregory keeps the old ones, says it's theatrical heritage. I didn't think much of it until the book hit the ground and burst open. What was inside? Jackson asked, his voice barely audible. Documents. Invoices. Budget reports, grant applications, donation receipts. I thought it was just boring paperwork, until I saw the numbers. Milo looked up. This time, his eyes weren't filled with fear, but fury long held back. The youth scholarship program, the one they brag about every year, big fundraisers, flashy promo videos, city grants. My mom and I have been here our whole lives. She sells tickets, I work backstage. When I turned 16, I applied for that scholarship. I thought I had a shot. Jackson nodded. He'd seen the program, front and center in every brochure Roxford produced, a badge of virtue they waved proudly each grant season. I got rejected, Milo said, staring down at his cooling hot chocolate. No explanation, no letter, nothing. And in that long silence that followed, Jackson felt it deeply. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about betrayal, trust shattered by those in power, and a boy trying to rise again from the ashes of a dream. Gregory said the funds were limited and there were more qualified candidates, but those papers in that book, the ones nobody was supposed to look at, said otherwise. Over $200,000, 0 cents, was allocated to the youth scholarship program last year, and you know what? Milo lifted his eyes, his voice trembling with fury. They gave out 3 scholarships, 3 small ones, about $5,000, 0 cents each. Jackson felt the fury rise in his chest like an undercurrent. Where did the rest go? He asked, even as the answer began to form in his mind. Something all too familiar. There were transfer records, Milo said, his voice tightening with restrained rage. Most of the money went to a company called Laneway Productions. That's Gregory's personal production company. He puts on shows in New York. Jackson clenched his fist. He'd suspected financial misconduct, but to siphon money from a youth scholarship program for kids like Milo? That wasn't just greed, that was premeditated cruelty. When I confronted him, Milo continued, his voice cracking. He laughed, said I didn't understand how the theater world worked, that it wasn't my place. His eyes turned hollow. That night, after rehearsal, he and 2 crew members, Bruno and Trent, ambushed me. Dragged me into the old prop storage. His voice broke again, trailing off like a song cut mid-note. Davy said I needed to be taught a lesson, that I had to learn how to respect my superiors. Jackson stayed silent. He knew that if he spoke now, the rage would overwhelm him. Didn't you go to the police? He asked gently, voice barely above a whisper. What proof? Milo said, shoulders slumping. Gregory took back all the documents. I escaped with nothing. And besides, he hesitated, then continued even more softly. My mom needs this job. She's a single mom. In this town, there aren't many options for someone like her. If I cause trouble, they'll fire her before anyone even knows I'm gone. We have to catch him red-handed, Milo said, his eyes blazing with a rare, steely determination, right in front of people he can't intimidate or charm with a smile. Jackson raised an eyebrow. You've already got something in mind, don't you? A faint smile touched Milo's lips. Not one of joy, but the kind born from hitting rock bottom and choosing to rise. But before he could say more, the control room door swung open. Gregory Lane stood in the doorway, a looming presence that instantly filled the space with pressure. Gone was his usual flamboyant scarf, replaced with a sleek silk tie. He was dressed for a donor meeting, Jackson guessed. Well, well, Gregory drawled, his voice like a sinister show tune. His eyes flitted from Jackson to Milo, then back again. Quite the cozy little chat you two are having." Jackson stood, moving subtly to place himself between Milo and Gregory. "We were just discussing the lighting setup for tomorrow's performance." "How interesting," Gregory said with a smirk, his tone laced with suspicion. "Because last I checked, Milo has nothing to do with lighting design." "I asked for his help," Jackson replied smoothly, his words honed from years of high-stakes negotiation. "The kid has a good eye." Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, he sees all kinds of things he shouldn't." He stepped fully into the room and shut the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. "You know, Jack," Gregory said, his tone sharp as ice, "I did a little checking on you. Your references sound solid enough, but something's off." Jackson kept his expression calm, though inside he cursed himself. He'd been meticulous. But Gregory wasn't a fool. "I'm not sure what you mean." "No." Gregory took a step closer, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "I called 3 of your supposed previous employers. Funny thing, 3 different stories, almost like you made them all up." The room thickened with tension. Milo stepped back instinctively but didn't flee. Jackson could feel the fear radiating off the boy like heat, yet he stood his ground. No trembling, no tears. "It's time for you to go, Jack," Gregory said coldly. "Pack your things. You're fired." The Prindenza. This was it, the turning point. Back down, and Jackson would lose access. Push back, and he risked blowing his cover. "No." One word, spoken softly but with the force of a hammer in the charged silence. Gregory blinked, genuinely surprised. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not leaving. If you're firing me, I'll need it in writing, with cause, and I expect my final paycheck, unless you'd rather discuss it with the Department of Labor." Gregory's mask cracked for just a moment, revealing the calculating menace beneath. He wasn't used to being challenged. "You're making a serious mistake," he said, voice low and dangerous. "People who cross me usually regret it." "Is that a threat?" Jackson asked calmly, his fingers subtly pressing the record button on his phone inside his pocket. Gregory's smile returned, slick and artificial, oozing falseness. "Of course not. Just friendly advice." He shot Milo a pointed glance. "Be careful who you trust, kid. Loyalty is everything in this business." The words lingered in the air like a curse. Then Gregory turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with exaggerated gentleness. Fake. Like everything else about him. The moment he was gone, Milo exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging from the tension. "He knows something's off," he said. "Good," Jackson replied, surprising him. "Let him feel the pressure. Predators only make mistakes when they're afraid." "You'll be watching us more closely now," Milo warned. "Exactly," Jackson nodded, "which means we need to speed things up." He turned to face Milo fully, eyes serious. "You mentioned a plan for the gala, something risky. Tell me." Milo hesitated for just a moment, then his gaze hardened with resolve. "I think it's time the real owner of the Roxford made an appearance, don't you?" A slow smile spread across Jackson's face. Now the real performance was about to begin. "I think you're right," Jackson said, his eyes gleaming in the soft golden glow of the control room. "And I think I know exactly how to make that entrance unforgettable." That night, the Roxford Theater glittered as if it had just awoken from a decades-long slumber. Chandeliers, once buried under layers of dust, now gleamed above the grand lobby. Time seemed to roll backward. Fresh flowers filled every vase, vintage posters framed along the walls, and strategic lighting masked the years of peeling paint and water stains. Waiters in black tuxedos glided through the crowd, lifting trays of champagne that sparkled like liquid diamonds. In one corner, a string quartet played softly, layering the room with elegance. Laughter rang out too loudly, promises floated in the air like perfume, and handshakes came chilled by ambition. From the lighting booth above, Jackson watched it all. Every detail, every expression. Board members in tailored suits laughed too easily. Arts Foundation reps whispered about budget reallocations, unaware they were walking straight into a perfectly set trap. The mayor was there too, currently being dazzled by Gregory Lane's melodic pitch about artistic legacy and community impact. Through his earpiece, Milo's voice came through, calm but taut as a piano wire. "Everything's in place, video files, audio, all cued. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Jackson replied, adjusting the bow tie of the tuxedo Diana had delivered to his hotel that afternoon. From anonymous stagehand to the true master of the house, he was ready to reclaim his theater. "Remember, stay backstage until I give the cue." What if he denies everything? What if nobody believes us? Jackson could hear the anxiety in the boy's voice, and he understood. Milo was pouring every ounce of courage into this night. "They'll believe the evidence," Jackson replied, each word heavy as iron. "The truth has a way of demanding to be heard, if you have the courage to speak it out loud." He checked his watch. It was time. In just a few minutes, Gregory Lane would step onto the stage and announce the evening's fundraising total, and unveil the future direction for the theater. A plan which, according to the files Jackson had uncovered, involved siphoning another $150,000, 0 cents, from the Youth Scholarship Fund to bankroll his personal project in Chicago. Not if Jackson had anything to say about it. He left the control booth, moving quietly through the dark upper hallway, his footsteps fading into the shadows. Below, Gregory was already striding onto the stage to the sound of eager applause. The spotlight caught his tall frame as he moved with the swagger of a man who believed this world belonged to him. "Friends of the Roxford," Gregory began, his voice carrying effortlessly without a microphone, a practiced performer's trick. "What a magnificent evening. Your generosity continues to astound me, and more than that, it sustains the lifeblood of this cultural institution." Another round of applause. Gregory soaked in the adoration like a reptile basking under warm light. "Tonight I'm thrilled to announce that we've raised over $300,000, 0 cents, for our arts programs, especially our cherished Youth Scholarship Initiative." More applause followed. Jackson began descending the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step measured like a countdown. "As many of you know, developing young talent has always been my greatest passion," Gregory continued, his grin growing more smug with every word. "And that's why I'm proud to introduce a new chapter in Roxford's story, a partnership with the Majestic Theater in Chicago that will unlock unprecedented opportunities for our talented students." Jackson reached the front row just as Gregory was painting his grand vision for regional collaboration, without a single mention that the partnership was with his own company, and that the Youth Scholarship Fund was the silent ATM financing his ambitions. "And with your continued support." Gregory froze. His eyes met Jackson's. For a heartbeat, there was confusion, then recognition, and finally, panic. "As I was saying," he stammered. "Please, go on," Jackson said, loud enough for the entire auditorium to hear. "I'm very curious to know how exactly my theater will be funding your Chicago venture." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience like wind across tall grass. Heads turned. A few guests already reached for their phones. Gregory's smile remained, but his eyes had gone ice cold. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're in the middle of a presentation. Perhaps one of our staff can assist you in the lobby." Jackson stepped toward the stage. "I don't think that will be necessary, Gregory," he said, his voice echoing through the increasingly quiet hall. After all, I own the place. The crowd buzzed. A wildfire of whispers swept through the rows. People leaned in, mouths agape. The real owner of the Roxford, a figure shrouded in myth, someone almost no one had seen in person, was now standing before them, very real and very much in control. Gregory froze for a moment. His forced smile faltered, then returned with painful stiffness as he extended a hand. Ms. Reeve. What an unexpected honor. That friend you haven't felt anything like this in a very long time. Press your finger. And produce what she said. Perhaps you'd have prepared a more convincing cover story, Jackson finished, his tone polite but sharp as a scalpel. He turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I believe those of you who've donated so generously to this theater deserve to know exactly where your money has been going. Gregory's final smile vanished. He stepped back slightly, scrambling for composure. Mr. Reeve, I'm sure we could discuss this privately. I think we've moved beyond private, don't you? Jackson nodded subtly toward the back of the hall. Just then, the large screen behind the stage flickered to life. Financial spreadsheets appeared in crystal clarity, bearing the Roxford's logo. Alongside them, scanned copies of bank transfers. Each payment to Gregory's private company, Laneway Productions, were highlighted in red. In the past 3 years, Jackson began, his voice steady and commanding, more than $500,000, funds explicitly earmarked for our youth scholarship program, have been redirected to Mr. Lane's personal production company. Gregory stepped forward, voice raised. These were authorized transactions, legitimate artistic partnerships. Authorized by whom? Jackson shot back. Not by me, not by the board according to meeting minutes, and certainly not by the donors, who specified that their contributions support young talent, not personal enrichment. The screen flipped to the next slide, youth scholarship records, 9 recipients over 3 years, despite a budget that could have supported dozens. Mr. Lane has been deliberately deceiving you, Jackson continued. He's stolen opportunities from gifted young people and used your generosity to fund his own ambitions. This is nonsense, Gregory shouted, eyes darting around the room. Harold, Judith, you know me. This is a smear campaign. Is it? Jackson nodded again. The screen changed once more. This time, a video. The footage from the old prop storage room played. Gregory stood in front of Milo, who was bound to a chair, fear wide in his eyes, mouth gagged. The auditorium fell silent, a collective intake of breath, then the eruption of shocked murmurs. Gregory lunged toward Jackson, but the security guards already positioned stepped in effortlessly. They didn't need to use force. The truth had already done the heavy lifting. This, Jackson said, turning back to the crowd, is how Mr. Lane handles those who discover his secrets. This young man found financial documents Mr. Lane had hidden, and for that, he was imprisoned, threatened, and repeatedly abused. G's lying, Gregory screamed, face red and veins bulging. That kid is disturbed. He made it all up. Jackson said nothing. He simply pulled out his phone and pressed play on a recording. Gregory's voice rang through the theater, shameless and dripping with contempt. Who's going to believe you over me? Your mom? The minimum wage ticket clerk? The board? They worship me. No one cares about low-level backstage nobodies like you. Gregory's face turned pale, as if the blood had been drained from it. Milo, Jackson called, would you mind joining us on stage? From the wings, Milo stepped out. His frame seemed small under the lights, but the fear that had once consumed him was gone from his eyes. his chin lifted slightly, and though his hands still trembled, his steps were steady as he made his way to center stage. The bruises on his wrists were clearly visible under the stage lights. Undeniable. Unignorable. "Tell them what you found," Jackson said, his voice no longer accusatory but inviting. An open door for the truth to walk through. Milo approached the microphone slowly. The entire auditorium held its breath. He began speaking in a soft voice, as though testing each word, afraid it might crack under the weight of memory. But with each sentence, each piece of his story, his voice grew stronger, resonant and sure, as if the truth itself was finally reclaiming its voice. He told of the moment he discovered the hidden documents, the shock of realizing Gregory, the man he once idolized, was the one bending every moral rule. He spoke of nights spent locked away, the suffocating silence, the threats, the fear that came every time he was dragged back to that dark room. But in those long nights, Milo said, he learned something. Silence is never the answer. Jackson watched quietly, his eyes scanning the faces of the audience, faces that had shifted from surprise to fury and now to empathy. When Milo finished speaking, the entire room rose in applause. It was more than just acknowledgement, it was an apology, a collective apology from the adults who had once looked away from the truth. At the back of the auditorium, Diana stood tall, her phone still glowing in her hand. The police, whom she had quietly called at the beginning of the event, had arrived. No sirens, no commotion, just the calm arrival of justice. "This is ridiculous," Gregory yelled one last time, his voice cracking in desperation. "You can't." "Actually, we can," came the calm, firm voice of the police captain. "Gregory Lane, you're under arrest for embezzlement, assault, and unlawful imprisonment of a minor." Gregory was handcuffed in front of the stunned audience. He still tried to fight, shouting his innocence, but no one was listening anymore. His downfall was too complete to ignore. The theater erupted into chaos, board members scrambling to distance themselves, donors demanding explanations, journalists rushing outside to call their editors. The gala, once meant to be a night of celebration, had become ground zero for a full-blown scandal. Mid the storm, Jackson remained beside Milo. One hand rested gently on the boy's shoulder. A small gesture, but one that carried the weight of protection, trust, and quiet pride. For Jackson, this wasn't just about restoring a theater's reputation. This was about putting truth under the spotlight. The week that followed moved like a whirlwind. Police interviews, emergency board meetings, relentless media coverage. Jackson, who had spent years staying out of the public eye, could no longer avoid the center stage. The old boardroom of the Roxford, once dormant under Gregory's reign, had become the new heart of the theater. Jackson now sat at the head of the long oak table, a place once tainted by poor decisions, now reshaped by integrity. Surrounding him were new board members, educators, artists, and community leaders, chosen not for their status, but for their values. "The audit's complete," Diana said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "It's worse than we thought. Nearly $700,000, 0 cents, siphoned over 4 years. Jackson nodded grimly. What about the scholarship applicants who were denied? Elaine Nichols, a retired high school drama teacher and the new director of the Youth Scholarship Program, spoke up. We contacted all 43. Many moved on, but 17 are still interested in reapplying. Fund them all, Jackson said without hesitation. And if any of them took out loans to study elsewhere, we'll repay those too. Martha, who had retained her role as theater manager after proving she had no part in Gregory's scheme, looked up from her notes, stunned. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Reeve, but can the theater afford it? I'll cover it personally, Jackson replied, not because of the money, because it's the right thing to do. Just then, a soft knock sounded at the door. Milo stood at the threshold, and for a brief moment every eye turned to him. It was still the same boy, but no longer the broken version of himself. Now he wore a clean button-down shirt, a tablet in hand, his steps confident and assured. "Sorry I'm late, Mom's car wouldn't start." "No problem," Jackson smiled, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "We were just talking about the scholarship program, and your role in it." Since the night of the gala, both Milo and his mother Elena had become vital parts of the Roxford's rebirth. Elena had been promoted from ticket clerk to administrative coordinator. Milo had been given the title of junior production assistant, a position created just for him, to harness his sharp memory and eye for detail. "Actually, I have a few ideas," Milo said as he sat down and opened his tablet. "I've been researching youth outreach programs at other regional theaters. There's one in Seattle that partners with local schools year-round, not just over the summer." Jackson watched Milo with quiet pride. The boy who used to flinch at Ray's voices now addressed the board with calm authority, answering questions with clarity and insight. He hadn't just survived, he had risen, stronger, braver, and now full of hope. The Roxford hadn't just been saved, it had been reborn, not by money, but by truth, compassion, and a voice no one could ignore. The bruises on Milo's wrists had begun to fade, now just faint traces like old ink. But Jackson knew some wounds run deeper, hidden beneath skin and memory. Still, this was a beginning. Not perfect, but strong enough to open a new chapter. After the meeting ended, Jackson remained in the boardroom, gazing out the tall windows at the theater's facade. Outside, workers were installing new letters announcing the upcoming season, the first under new leadership. The marquee glowed in the dusk like a quiet declaration. Roxford was back, and stronger than ever. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Milo's voice came from behind, soft but certain. Jackson turned. "What makes you say that?" "You've done everything you came here to do," Milo replied simply, without resentment. "Fixed the finances, rebuilt the leadership, brought the bad guys down. That's your thing, right? You show up, fix everything, then disappear." Jackson paused. Sometimes he forgot just how perceptive the boy was. "I've got other theaters that need attention," he admitted, "and I've never been one for day-to-day management." A flicker of disappointment crossed Milo's face before he covered it with a mechanical nod. "Yeah, makes sense. But," Jackson continued, pausing like an actor about to deliver the line that turns the scene, "I'm considering staying involved with Roxford more directly. Maybe stop by once a month. After all, someone's got to keep an eye on our new scholarship program." "Really?" The surprise and hope in Milo's voice were impossible to miss. "You mean it?" Jackson placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Some investments are worth showing up for." The sun dipped lower behind the theater's soaring windows, casting long shadows between the empty seats. Jackson left the boardroom and stepped out onto the stage, lit only by the soft glow of the work lights, creating that surreal space only a theater could conjure. Not quite reality, not quite fantasy, just somewhere in between. Diana had arranged for his private jet to depart the following morning. His legal team had finalized the charges against Gregory, who now faced years behind bars. Roxford's finances were secure again, bolstered by new grants and a private endowment Jackson had established himself. He could leave at any time. But his feet carried him toward center stage, toward the ghost light that had flickered so mysteriously on his first night here. He knelt down and gently touched the base of the old fixture. Then, slowly, he switched it off. From his pocket, he pulled out a small package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a new ghost light, sleek, sturdy, with a polished brass base that gleamed in the dim light. He replaced the old one, plugged it in, and flipped the switch. This time, the light didn't flicker. It shone steady and clear, casting Jackson's silhouette long across the stage like a ribbon of memory being etched into the boards. His fingers brushed the engraved words on the base. May truth always find the spotlight. Jackson stepped back, satisfied. To most it was just a utility lamp, but to him it was something more, a symbol of justice, of hope, and of a promise kept. Footsteps echoed from the wings. Milo emerged, standing quietly in the red glow of the exit sign. "He came to say goodbye," he said. "Mom and I are heading home, but I saw the light on stage. Just setting things right for whoever comes next," Jackson replied, his voice as gentle as a breath. Milo walked closer, crouched down, and read the inscription on the lamp's base. A small smile played at his lips. "It will," he whispered, "as long as someone's brave enough to turn it on." Jackson nodded, a rare, deep peace settling over his chest. He had come to Roxford chasing discrepancies in numbers, but was leaving with something far greater. A reminder that some investments aren't measured on spreadsheets. They're measured in people, in trust, in the power to change what others said couldn't be changed. "I'll see you next month," Jackson said, breaking the stage's solemn hush like the final line of a play. "Try not to overhaul the entire youth program before I get back." Milo grinned, a real, unguarded smile that lit up his whole face like a lead stepping into the spotlight. "No promises." Together, they stepped down from the stage, leaving the ghost light glowing bright and steady, a silent sentinel in the heart of the theater. But unlike the first night Jackson had seen it, this time the light didn't flicker with warning or pain. It burned with rebirth. Steady, clear, and true. The curtain had fallen at the Roxford Theater, but the light stayed on.